Well, good morning. We want to welcome you to worship. We are anticipating, provided we don't see something to change our plan week, returning to services next Sunday. However, there are going to be a number of guidelines that we are going to insist be followed. There's going to be some folks that are going to kind of help see that those things are followed. We'll be communicating those. They'll be on our website. They'll be on our Facebook page. I'm not going to go into all of those details now, but please be aware that it will not be like it was. It's not a return to normal, and we're seeking to do the best we can, and so we will still offer live services on both on YouTube, and we encourage you to participate in the way that you feel is best. I encourage you to, if you're on our Facebook page, to read and consider what Andrew wrote in response to our opening, and think about the issue and explore that, and be open to making an informed decision about what is best for you and for your family. And so we just want to know that, want you to know that we are going to do the best we can, but we want you to be cautious. We want you to be informed. We want you to consider carefully the decision that you need to make that's best for you and for yours. With that being said, today is the day of Pentecost, or the day we remember the day of Pentecost. If we think about the church calendar as a way of kind of marking time, this is the day of Acts 2, when the Spirit descends and this people of God, this ragtag group of folks that are largely uneducated, who have been hiding in fear and ducking and covering, suddenly make this bold appearance, and they tell the good news of Jesus. And it's a radical, transformative moment. It's a uniting moment. It's a moment that transcends many different barriers. And it spawns a movement that has continued to this day, so much so that 2,000 years from that event, we mark it. We tell the story. But I think it has particular implications for us today, as we think about what it means to be led by the Spirit, united by the Spirit, to be responsive to this message of Christ, as we have been waiting and looking and continue to be on mission. So with that in mind, let us worship together.
All right, well, whether you are at home or here with us, if you are able to, please stand and join us as we sing This Is Amazing Grace.
Breaks the power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger. King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the whole earth with only thunder, who leaves us breathless in awe and wonder. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. yes, I sing for all that you've done for me. You've been to Jesus for the cleansing power. Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by your Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Do your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Good morning. Have you ever seen the movie Peter Pan? I'm sure most of you have, but in that movie, they sing a song and play a game, and it goes something like this. Following the leader, following the leader, wherever he will go. I don't know about you, but I used to play the game Follow the Leader a lot when I was a little kid, and I think that's one of those games that everybody has played. My parents played it, my kids played it. When I was a teacher, we played it at school, and the deal is it's a really simple game that we can follow, and we just have to have a leader, and then what you want to do is what they do, and so that you don't get out of the game. And so following the leader is something that we do all through life. We also do that not just in a game, but we do that in life. If you're on a sports team, a lot of time there's a leader. At church there's a leader. At school there's a leader. Pretty much everywhere we are, there is a leader that we follow. The thing that we remember is that it's important when we choose a leader to follow. And it's important that we follow a leader that is going to take us in the right direction. In Mark 1, we see, I've got to get my bifocals fixed here. In Mark 1, 16 through 20, Jesus was choosing his first disciples, and as he was passing the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, Simon's brother. They were casting a net into the sea since they were fishermen. "Follow me," Jesus told them, "and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. Going on a little farther, he saw James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in their boat mending their nets. Immediately and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. They immediately followed Jesus. Jesus was the leader, and they chose to follow. Jesus has asked us to follow, asked you and me to follow him. And we have the choice to let him be our leader and say yes. And pray with me, please. Father, I just thank you for this day. I just thank you for Jesus. I thank you for the life that he lived on earth. And Father, that he chose us to follow him. And I pray that you will help us to answer that call. We ask in your name. Amen.
Though the tears, my song will rise to you. Though my heart may fail, my song will rise to you. While there's breath in my lungs, I will praise you, Lord. In the dead of night, I'll lift my eyes to you. When the waters rise, I'll lift my eyes to you. While there's hope in this heart, I will praise you, Lord. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. In the darkness I'll dance, in the shadows I'll sing. The joy of the Lord is my strength. I cannot see you with my eyes, let faith arise to you. When I cannot feel your hand in mine, let faith arise to you. God of mercy and love, I will praise you, Lord. Oh, you shine with glory, Lord, light. I feel alive with you. In your presence now I come alive, yes, I'm alive with you. There is strength when I say I will praise you, Lord. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. In the darkness I'll dance, in the shadows I'll sing. The joy of the Lord is my strength. When sorrow comes my way, you're the shield around me. Always you remain my courage in the fight. I hear you call my name, Jesus, I am coming, walking on the waves, reaching for your light. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. In the darkness I'll dance, in the shadows I'll sing. The joy of the Lord is my strength. name is like honey on my lips, your spirit like water to my soul. Your word is a lamp unto my feet. Jesus, I love you. I love you, Jesus. Holy and anointed one,
When we have an item that becomes very common in our society, even though it's a specific brand of a specific item, that word can be kind of the phrase for everything like that. For instance, when I was growing up, if someone said, "Would you like a Coke?" they didn't necessarily mean, "Would you like a Coca-Cola?" It could be any kind of soda water. But Coke was that word. There are other examples I'm sure that we could think of. Maybe an older example might be a Hoover, right? That even became a word, right? Or a verb, to hoover something up, right? But that's actually a specific brand of a vacuum. Well, Pentecost, that word, probably has taken on a life sort of like that in our world. And perhaps when we hear the word Pentecost, we kind of move immediately to thinking about Pentecostal and some of those kinds of expressions of worship that are much more free and expressive. Perhaps there's these demonstrations of different things like speaking in tongues and so on and so forth. But Pentecost, what it actually refers to is this festival that would happen 50 days after Passover. And it was a time to bring in an offering, a first fruit, so on and so forth. And so for the first century Jew returning to Jerusalem at this time of Pentecost, what it was a reminder that this God who had established this covenant, who had brought them through the Exodus, which they had just remembered 50 days prior at the Passover, they would have gathered and they would have had this meal, they would have offered these prayers, they would have told the story, but they would have told it in such a way as if they had been through it themselves, as a way of just kind of saying, this is our story, this is who we are. And now you move forward to this moment where they've gathered, and really what it is it's a way of acknowledging that God made a way of life possible for his people to be, to live, to do, to act in the world as God's people. So it's interesting that it's at this moment during this observance that the Spirit of God comes upon this group of people that's gathered in this room. You remember last week when we considered that Jesus told them they would be witnesses, and their witness would be enabled by this power that God would give them to tell the story, to give an account. And it would happen in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth. Well, we see that beginning here to unfold. And I'm going to read here just the first 4 verses of Acts chapter 2. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. So Jesus has been resurrected from the dead. He has made appearances to the disciples. He has spent this time with them. He has told them that they're going to carry forward his work, but then he ascends. He goes back to the Father. There's an echo there that to Moses. Moses is with the people. He's trying to guide them and help them, but then he goes up on the mountain. And when he's off the mountain, what is it that he has? The law. Here is the way in which you as God's people are now to live. And so here, in a sense, is Jesus returning. Not in the way that Moses did, but by the Spirit of God coming and moving amongst the people who claimed to be Jesus' followers. And in effect, what is now introduced is not a static code that is simply chiseled into a stone and here's what you do in these particular circumstances. Here's what you don't do in these particular circumstances. Here's what's right, here's what's wrong, so on and so forth. But it's this dynamic capacity to be able to carry forward the ongoing work that God has started in the world. And now this purpose has been clearly demonstrated in Jesus. And it is the people of Jesus, empowered by the Spirit of God, who now are carrying this forward. And what's remarkable when you think about this group of people is how utterly unqualified they would have been to lead such a movement. I mean, they would have not been considered educated. They would have been, for the most part, tradesmen, and not that there's anything wrong with tradesmen can't be intelligent, but those typically are not the people who are called upon to lead. And yet here they are, and at the front of the column is Peter. And just imagine for a moment what had to happen in Peter's life for him to be able to stand in this place and say what it is that he is about to say that we're going to read here in just a moment. Because you'll remember that Peter, when he's first getting started, he's very zealous. He seems to be the first to act. A lot of times it seems that the question that everybody probably wants to ask, Peter is the one that asks it. But Peter also has this kind of inflated sense of what it is that he's going to be able to do. And he finds that is a poor assessment. Because when pressed, we all know what happened. 3 times, he denied Jesus. Jesus on one side of the courtyard with the Sanhedrin and this mock trial of sorts, other by the servants. And when the servants question him, 3 times he denies Jesus. And so it kind of, at least it does to me, that Peter would have said, I'm going to go fishing. Because failure causes us sometimes to long for what was familiar, to go back to the way that it was. I mean, how often did we read about that in Scripture, where the children of Israel are wandering in the wilderness, say, we want to go back to Egypt, because this feels so hard. We're tired of hearing our children cry. We're tired of this terribly difficult existence that we find ourselves in and day out. And so when Peter says, I'm going to go fishing, that just seems to kind of make sense. I mean, who of us has not at one time or another said, I wish we could go back to whatever that was? So Peter is afraid, like every other of the disciples. They lock themselves in. They got Jesus, and Jesus could heal. Jesus could he could shut the mouths of his accusers. What are we going to do? If they got Jesus, they can get us. They're afraid. And somehow this fearful, impetuous failure is at the front saying, listen to what I'm going to tell you. There's a story that I want to share. Well, it's in those 4 verses that we see this dynamic enablement that occurs. The Spirit of God has descended. God has kept his promise to write the law on the hearts of people so that they will have the capacity to know and to respond to God. But something interesting happens here in this 4th verse. As they begin to speak, they begin to speak in these various languages. Now, it would have made sense if they had spoken in Greek, because Greek would have been sort of the language that you can pretty well kind of find everywhere, and it's not your first language probably, but you can get by. You can communicate. It would at least be familiar. Or maybe that they would have spoken Aramaic, Hebrew, because it is a gathering of Jews that is here in this place. And so, that would make sense too, but that's not what happens. What happens is they begin to hear this language that's familiar to them. Because gathered for the festival of Pentecost are people from all over the Roman Empire. You can see that in verse 5. They were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. They heard this sound. They came together. They were bewildered, utterly amazed. Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? How is it they're speaking in our language? You look at verses 9 and 10 and 11 that lists the different places from which these folks would have come. Perhaps many of them, they would have been maybe a century or more in those places. So the languages of those places really would have been their language. You see it in Texas. We have a large population that has come from Mexico, and you'll see where Spanish is home, but the kids speak English and speak English very well, and probably primarily English becomes their language. And then that next generation after that, those parents, they can speak Spanish well and understand Spanish well, but their kids, not so much, because the language of the culture begins to influence them. So you would have had that kind of situation happening. And so here are these people, and they're hearing this language that's their language, that is the way. I think about it like this. When you dream in a language. They're hearing the language their dreams are in. They're not having to kind of work at, Cindy said, our heart language. That's a good way of thinking about it. And I think that demonstrates something that needs to be heeded when we consider what's happening here at Pentecost. Jesus has already said to his disciples, you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Those are boundaries that get crossed. But here, At the very kind of launch point of this movement, all these different languages are being spoken. The way that those people are best able to hear is the language that is spoken to them. So from the heart, the move is towards the people. It is to try to connect and meet with them. We would do well to remember that that is right there at that beginning moment. That there was an accommodation for the distinctions in these people. And so as they hear, they're bewildered. I mean, they don't understand. And, some people are seriously intrigued. They want to better kind of grapple with what's taking place here, so they're kind of actively listening. Other people who do what people sometimes do, they don't want to deal with something that they don't understand, and so they dismiss, right? Yeah, they're drunk, whatever. But in verse 14, Peter stands up, and he has the other apostles there with him, and he begins to speak. Fellow Jews, and all you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These people are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 a.m. No, this is what was spoken of by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. And he goes on to describe this passage from Joel, that they are now, in this moment, seeing brought to light. So here's maybe a second thing that is interesting to observe here. Not only does the message reach out and draw in this crowd of people by moving towards them in a way that they can grasp and understand best, but it requires the people who are moving this thing along themselves have to do a good bit of relearning, of reinterpreting. And it's interesting when you kind of trace this line through the book of Acts to see, just if you look at Peter's life, what it actually requires of him. The very thing that he's just quoted to them to say, this is what's happening right here in this moment. This is where you are. The book of Joel. It is going to require him to come to a completely different understanding. It's like to live and to respond as a faithful follower of God. He's going to have a vision of animals that he would have never eaten, and he's going to be told to eat those animals. And he's going to be led by that vision to go to a centurion's house, and he's going to enter that house, breaking with tradition, and he's going to witness for himself those people responding to the good news. He's going to witness for himself Samaritans responding to the good news. And it comes to the point where in Acts 15, when the church is now in Jerusalem saying, whoa, we didn't know that this is what we were getting ourselves into. How do we deal with all of this? What do we do about all these non-Jews who have really kind of changed the story, so to speak? It's Peter who says, guys, I know we read it this way, and I know we thought about it this way, but look at what God has done. It requires a new Pentecost is dynamic. and that's probably the last thing I'll say about this. I think we yearn for the static, to have a easy, concise, clear definition that can be assembled together into a neat and orderly system. Don't get me wrong, we need order. We must have order. We must have organization. Those people who talk about how bad man-made religion is and denominations are, and they're non-denominational, all they're doing is creating a different order and organization that just has a different way of, it's just a semantic game. We need order. We need organization. It is absolutely necessary. But what we have to understand is that at the heart of this movement is something that is dynamic. Something that can't simply be reduced to a system that is one size fits for all time. Because God is always going to be compelling us to move to where people are and to communicate with them in a way that's easy and most accessible for them to understand. God is always going to be calling upon us to reflect, to reinterpret, to relearn. And largely, that is because we don't have it figured out. Fit God into our complete, exhaustive understanding. There is so much more than we actually can truly claim to know. And so it is dynamic. And it is dependent upon the moving and directing of God. But notice in this story, what does God do? He moves and directs people together. He speaks in a way that they can hear, but what he calls for is a response that brings together. And that's what happens at the end of this day. A group of people has come together. A group of people who share in common a commitment to Christ, that to live with a profound concern and hospitality and generosity towards one another and towards those who surround them. God brings us together. Never going to kind of sort of get that until the day that God sets all things right. Until there is that one people from every nation, tribe, tongue, and language gathered before the throne and the Lamb. But until then, it still is about us being brought together. But that being brought together is not saying, okay, y'all come be like us and do it our way, the way that's worked for the past X number of years. That coming together is dynamic, and it requires our continual growth and transformation as we seek to accept the help and the empowerment offered by the Spirit of God.
highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair bowed down with care. God gave his son, who when his erring child the saints and angels.
May you, this day, this week, not just think about the properties of the wind and what it does and its effects, but may it mess up your hair and ruffle your shirt, and may it just engulf you as you seek to be a witness and carry this story forward. As you move towards those who will require you to learn new ways of sharing and relating. And also, may it continue to mold and shape you in those ways that cause you to relearn and to think. And we're grateful that you've joined us with worship. May you go with grace.